My name is Samantha. I am 27 years old. My life seems to be cloudless and successful, working in the creative field at a software company in Florida, the sea breeze, the warm sun and modern office spaces where coffee smells in the morning and the quiet tension of upcoming deadlines hovers in the evenings. From the outside, it seems that my life is full of opportunities and pleasures, but in reality, behind the scenes of success there is another, much more harsh reality. A year ago, my family's world turned upside down. My father, whose company has been our main source of income and guarantor of stability for many years, failed and the business collapsed. Without warning, without delay or time to prepare, everything we relied on collapsed in a matter of months, leaving us in ruin and uncertainty. And it was then, in the midst of this chaos, that I had to make the difficult decision to return to my hometown, under the roof of my parents' house, to try to support our family. Now our way of life, our future, all depends on my income, and my job, although it seems like a dream for many, has become the only support in an unstable world from which the illusion of security has long gone. The three of us now live together, me, Mom, and Mary's younger sister. Mary has always been someone who could be herself, free from expectations and obligations. And now this freedom has taken on a painful form. Mary hardly realizes that she is behind it and keeps our house afloat. I don't blame her for this, but seeing her carefree attitude every day, I feel a fire of resentment ignite in my soul. One evening, when my mother and I were sitting in the kitchen discussing the upcoming days, she, as if casually, started talking about what she wanted for dinner. "We could cook pork steaks tomorrow," she said with a casual smile. I sighed softly, feeling the weight of the new expenses fall on my shoulders, and replied, "Mom, I understand, but we are running out of money for groceries. It might be worth reviewing the menu." Mom looked at me with mild displeasure, but before she could say anything, Mary intervened in the conversation. "You don't give enough money for food," she said sharply, as if she were saying. I looked at her in amazement, not believing that these words were coming from my sister. "Mary, I already give $10,000 for groceries every month. Isn't that enough?" She just snorted, turning to me with an arrogant grin. "You try to live on $10,000 now, when prices are soaring every day. We don't have enough." Her words sounded so soulless that I couldn't help but feel anger boiling inside me. "If you have a problem with that, why don't you get a job and help pay for the food?" I said, trying to keep calm, but my voice was shaking. Mom immediately rushed to her sister's defense. "Mary is trying, but you know how difficult it is to find a job right now." I saw two people close to me in front of me, but their words struck like sharp blades, each of which left a new scar. Mary, with her empty promises and attempts to portray the appearance of effort, just sat at home, spending her days on the internet, and Mom didn't seem to notice her indifference, only justified her every time the conversation touched on finances. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "Why don't we sell this house and move to Grandma's hometown? At least you can find a job there, and life won't be so difficult." The world around me seemed to have narrowed to the limit when I heard this stunning news. $20,000. For 4 days. An amount that I would never have allowed myself to spend so easily, even in the best of times. 20,000 is almost half of my monthly income, and that money was withdrawn from my credit card without my knowledge. This could only mean one thing: Mary took full advantage of my trust, as if my work and efforts were worth nothing to her. How could she, knowing what I'm going through, just take and enjoy a luxurious vacation while I'm here at work, trying my best to support our family? I stared at the phone, nervously clutching the receiver, trying to digest what I had heard. The agent on the line kept talking about the details of the transactions: expensive restaurants, boutiques, even yacht rentals, and each new mention seemed to add a new layer of tension and frustration to me. At some point, I interrupted him, thanked him for the information, and hung up, feeling a growing sense of injustice and resentment inside me. When I got home, my parents were waiting for me in the living room, and their faces seemed to glow with calmness, as if everything in our house was in perfect order. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore and immediately asked, holding back the tremor in my voice. "Mom, Dad, did you know that Mary used my credit card for her trip?" My mother looked at me in surprise and quickly replied, as if she did not understand what was being said. "What?" "Yes, Mary said that she won the trip, but I didn't know that it took some money from you." My father, frowning, added, "She won it in the lottery, didn't she? I don't understand why she needed your money." My anger, which had been pent up until that moment, spilled out. "Maybe she won," I said, trying to control myself, "but obviously it's not enough to rest like she used to. She spent $20,000 in 4 days, and all that money was withdrawn from my card." I watched my parents' faces slowly change, as if they didn't immediately understand what I was talking about. Mom frowned and lowered her eyes, and Dad just shrugged. "This is unacceptable, of course," he said at last, but there was no trace of condemnation in his voice. Mom also tried to soften the situation. "Well, maybe it's just a mistake. You know how Mary is. She might not have thought of it. Don't think about it." I almost screamed, feeling the tears coming. Mary spends money that we don't have, and meanwhile I save on everything, give up little things, don't even allow myself an extra cup of coffee to make ends meet and support our family. I couldn't believe that all this was really happening. Mary's words in the voice message sounded like gunshots, cold, indifferent, as if the money I earned with my work was something she took for granted, something that could always be used at her discretion. "Make the card usable, stingy," she repeated in my mind as I stood in the middle of the room, barely holding back my anger. When the parents heard the message, their faces turned pale, and they rushed to their bedroom to check their credit cards, as if they suddenly began to realize that Mary was not at all as innocent as they used to think. In the silence that followed, I felt a dull bitterness. Was it necessary to go to such an extreme for them to finally notice what was happening? I stood with my fists clenched, feeling every muscle tense, ready to explode. The whole spectacle of souvenirs, lottery, and random spending now looked like a mockery. Mary didn't hesitate to spend money on everything that came to her mind, while I saved every cent so that our family could live normally. And now that her cards were blocked, she turned to me out of habit, thinking that I would give in again. But this time something in me broke. When the parents came out of their room, holding empty credit cards in their hands, their gazes finally became a little more serious. Her father, struggling for words, muttered, "Samantha, maybe we need to talk to Mary. Maybe she just doesn't realize how much it all costs. She was hoping so much to please you, to bring you souvenirs." I couldn't stand it and replied sarcastically, "Is it pleasant? Should I bring souvenirs?" My voice trembled with barely suppressed indignation. For $20,000 withdrawn from my card? Pleasant is when you do something that brings joy without such consequences. Mary will only bring mountains of debts, not souvenirs. Mom, continuing to persist, added with a tired look, "Samantha, understand, we are all a family. You were her age too, carefree, living one day." I smiled bitterly. I was her age too, yes, but I didn't allow myself to be so irresponsible. I worked to provide for myself, and did not ask for money for expensive entertainment, especially not spending someone else's money without permission. My father tried to intervene, but understanding flashed in his eyes. He seemed to lack the words to justify Mary's action, but he was still looking for a way to soften my indignation. However, I have already made a decision. I won't let any of them take advantage of me anymore, as if my patience and resources were endless. I turned to my parents and said, "Consider this a warning." I stopped the card to prevent further spending. But if you think that I will continue to live like this, then you are mistaken. My job is not your wallet, and my life is not your insurance against financial difficulties. My parents froze, and I saw something like confusion and shame reflected on their faces. Their eyes, wide with shock, reflected a mixture of disbelief and fear. Mary, gracefully pretending not to understand my words, broke the silence with a fake smile. "Is this a joke, Samantha? You can't just sell our house like that. This is our house." I held her gaze without batting an eye, and answered, as if challenging. "This is not a joke, Mary. The house is really sold, and everything is already decorated. And yes, I've taken care of all the things, so you don't have to worry about moving." Mom clutched at her heart, her face suddenly turned pale. Her lips were trembling, as if she was going to say something that could bring everything back, but she couldn't find the right words. "Samantha," she said hoarsely, "this place is our life. We built everything here. This is where you and Mary grew up. How could you?" I squinted, trying to hold back the sudden rush of emotions that were raging inside like a storm. The question, "How could I?" was simple, because I could no longer and did not want to be their endless source of resources, an invisible donor, silently covering the debts and whims of others. My father, usually reserved and cold, suddenly stepped up to me and put his hand on my shoulder, as if trying to convey his thoughts to me through touch. "Samantha, please, this is our house. Let's talk about it, let's decide something else. We can start over as a family." I smiled bitterly, realizing that his words had come too late. I had been their family sponsor for too long and no longer saw the point. "We've tried to start over too many times, Dad. But each time it meant only one thing: I had to sacrifice even more. And I'm tired. I'm tired of the fact that the only value I have in this family is the money that I can spend for you." Mary, still unaware of the gravity of the situation, flushed with indignation. "You're so petty, Samantha. It's just a house. You could at least consult with us before making such a decision. You've always been such a tightwad, and now this. You don't even think about how this will affect us." I just grinned at her words, at that moment finally realizing how little all my efforts meant to her. This house was not just walls and a roof for me, it was the place where I once dreamed of support and love, but instead found only obligations and endless claims. "Maybe you'll all find a new place you can call home," I said coldly. "And I will finally find my own place where I will not feel like just a wallet for all of you." With that, I took a step back, looking at my parents and Mary, caught off guard, their faces a mixture of hurt and disbelief. The house has finally passed out from under my caring hands, as has the family, who are so used to my endless care. The realization of freedom, long awaited and suffered, covered me like a warm wave, washing away the traces of worries and obligations that I had assumed many years ago. Now, knowing that my family was under the strict but fair supervision of my grandmother, I could finally breathe easy. Grandma's modest restaurant in Miami, known locally for its unpretentious but soulful menu, has become a kind of school of life for them. Under her experienced guidance, Mom and Dad now realized what everyday efforts meant, and Mary, who found herself without the old comforts and privileges, faced the need to earn her own labor, albeit in the humble form of helping in the kitchen. Grandma knew a lot about parenting. Her harsh views and ruthlessly organized daily routine did not leave them the slightest chance for whims. Sometimes I called my grandmother, not wanting to disturb my own independence with meetings, and listened to her brief reports on the state of family affairs. Her voice was dry, but sometimes when she talked about how Mary had finally learned, at least according to her, to appreciate work, I could hear the hidden pride in her grandmother's intonations. She didn't mention the thanks she might have expected from them, and to be honest, I didn't really want to hear them. Meanwhile, in Miami, life went on as usual, as if to remind you that work and respect are inextricably linked. My parents now tried to please my grandmother, fearing her frown more than they could be afraid of anything in life. Sometimes, in her short messages, there was irony. Mary now knows how to clean floors. She has become a real craftsman. Feelings, mixed and deep, overwhelmed me. I didn't feel anger or a thirst for revenge, but this orderly picture of family occupational therapy gave me the peace I had long dreamed of. In the silence of the evening city, I stood on the balcony, lost in my thoughts again. The echoes of his conversation with Mary were still ringing in his head, causing a whole swirl of feelings, from cautious relief to a strange feeling of warmth. Her voice, so uncertain, trembling, was unusual, almost painfully honest. This unexpected change was exciting, and at the same time embarrassing. The next Sunday afternoon, I came to a small cozy cafe near the station a little earlier than the appointed time, choosing a table by the window from where I could watch the life of the street. Inside, amid the aroma of freshly roasted coffee and the quiet chime of cups, I felt a kind of intense calm. What was to be said and heard seemed to lie on the very surface, but at the same time was deeper than all the words. When the cafe door opened and I saw Mary, everything seemed to freeze for a moment. She approached the table slowly. Her steps were unusually quiet and hesitant. Mary didn't look the way I was used to seeing her. Her face wasn't deliberately confident, but rather thoughtful and a little lost. I felt something like longing, remembering how long it had been since I had seen her so real, without the protective armor of cold arrogance. "Hi," she said softly, smiling faintly. "Hi," I nodded, watching her movements carefully as she sat down opposite me, avoiding my gaze, as if gathering strength for what she wanted to say. An awkward pause hung between us as we both tried to find the right words. I didn't know what to expect, but I was ready to hear it. Taking a deep breath, Mary finally looked up at me, and I saw in them the confusion that seemed so sincere and defenseless. "Samantha, She bit her lip, as if she didn't know how to continue. "I just want to say that I'm really sorry. I've made so many mistakes over the years. I was so selfish, so blind." Mary's words were quiet, almost a whisper, but every one of them echoed inside me. She talked about how naively she took the care and comfort that I provided for them, how she used to take it for granted. About how scary it really was when she found herself without the usual support, alone with reality, where all the complacent masks fall off, leaving only the need to work and take care of herself. I listened to her, feeling something cold and long melting inside me, which I did not dare to let go. The pain, the resentment, all of this, of course, will not go away in an instant. But looking at Mary, at her sincere tears and confused face, I suddenly realized that there was a man standing in front of me who finally realized something important, perhaps even more than his grandmother could explain to him. When I stood at my grandmother's doorstep, her quiet house, as if breathing memories, greeted me with the smell of freshly cooked food and the sounds of the familiar, soothing noise of the kitchen. This time, everything seemed different. The house, where once there was an uneasy silence, now had a special atmosphere, an atmosphere of reconciliation and patient expectation. I knew that this evening would be important, that at this table, where we had not gathered for so long, there would be words and looks that I should have decided on. My parents, noticing me, stood up, shifting awkwardly from one foot to the other. My mother, usually strict and reserved, could hardly find my eyes. My father, who always hid his emotions behind an external severity, also looked a little embarrassed. They came up to me, and the first thing I noticed was their soft, guilty faces. Their every word was unusually honest, and as if breaking through the wall of the past, they began to talk about their gratitude and regret. Dad spoke first, his voice trembling slightly. "Samantha, we both know how long you've been the one we've pinned all our hopes on. We didn't notice how our decisions became your burden. We understand that we hurt both you and Mary. And now, after all these years, we see that, perhaps for the first time, we really understand how you felt all this time." Mom nodded, squeezing my hand tightly. Her eyes glistened with tears, and she barely kept her voice from trembling, whispered, "Forgive us, dear. I'm sorry that we realized this so late." I looked at them, feeling the hardships of the past give way to new feelings. It seemed as if even the walls of this house absorbed our words, our tears, our silent promises. For the first time in many years, I felt that our wounds could begin to heal. There was a quiet, calm atmosphere at the table. Grandma, wise and patient, did not interfere, but her gaze was warm and reassuring. We talked, remembered, and laughed, as if we were finding our way back to each other. It wasn't just a family dinner, it was the first step towards a new life. When I was about to leave, my grandmother led me to the door and stopped me. She looked into my eyes, and her gaze was deep, full of understanding and caring. "Samantha," she said softly, taking my hands in hers. "You've grown up strong and brave. But I want you to remember that strength is not all you need. The main thing is to keep kindness and gentleness in your heart. This is something that will always help you, because without kindness and forgiveness, even the strongest strength can become a heavy burden." I nodded, feeling her words sink deep into my soul. At that moment, something inside me thawed out. Years of resentment, unspoken feelings, and pain have finally found their place. I hugged my grandmother, and feeling her warmth, I allowed myself to cry like a child who is no longer expected to grow up and be firm. These tears were a release, washing away the hardships of the past and opening the way to a new beginning. When I left my grandmother's house into the cool night air, I felt an extraordinary lightness. For the first time in a long time, the burden of resentment and disappointment began to go away. I knew that there would be many difficult moments ahead, but I also understood that now I was not alone. My family was starting to change, and I saw that hope had been rekindled in us, hope for a new, bright future in which we could be together and support each other, despite all the past mistakes.